All right, before we jump to the next talk, I just wanted to remind you all about the competition that we're having today. If you want to win a 1 year long IntelliJ license for any professional tool, professional edition of their tools, including PyCharm Professional, just post a photo of how you're watching the Pykonik stream on either Facebook with a mention of the Pykonik, or on Slack on the general channel. But right now we're getting to the second talk today. So Céline will tell us a bit about Agile, with a big question if that's only for extroverts. Céline is now on a career break. She has worked in Memrise, earlier on in a Code for Life team in Ocado. She has been in Poland a few times, in Krakow as well. And she is learning Polish. So I think that it may be not this stage, but maybe the next talk would be in Polish, hopefully. So now giving microphone fully to Céline, and let's welcome her with a loud virtual applause.
Thank you. So yeah, hello everyone. And thanks, Kuba, for the introduction. So now I feel like I have to talk in Polish more often. So yeah, what we're going to talk about today is, as you said, is Agile only for extroverts, but also how in general different personality types might affect engagement of developers with software ways of working. And also if there are any issues that we can find, sort of how can we sort of adapt processes. So that's why we're going to talk about. So I was going to introduce myself, but Kuba already did that. So Cześć, Jestem, Céline, uczę, polskiego. So yeah, I actually used to learn Polish with Memrise, which is how I found the job at Memrise first, as an engineering manager. But now I'm on a career break, but I still like sort of to share. So I hope that you will enjoy this talk. I was like a Python developer when I started my career, and a robotics developer. But then I became a team lead, and I worked with lots of different types of team, but most often in agile situations. So that's sort of all thoughts that sort of came to me about agile and how it is adapted to the people that make the team. So I also talk about things like natural language processing in Python, so maybe that will be another talk that I'm going to give, maybe in Polish, who knows. And also you might ask me, since we are talking about introversion and extroversion, where I am on the spectrum, and I think I'm probably an ambivert, which means that in the introvert in me that decided to give a talk today, and now probably my introvert itself has to give the talk, so it's going to be nice, it's going to be fun. And yes, indeed, I miss Krakow a lot. So this is some things that I miss in Krakow. Maybe not the Galeria Krakowska, but I don't know. Maybe I do. So just the outline of what we're going to talk about today. So first, personalities, obviously. So what we're going to talk about in terms of introversion, etc. A few words about agile and collaborative environments. The big question: do introverts hate agile or not? And then some ideas, tools, and good practices that maybe you can find useful. And there's like some sort of different topic, but very related about personality types and pair programming. And then maybe a slide of takeaways and some references for you to take away after the talk. So first, personalities. So the main thing we're going to talk about is the spectrum between introversion and extraversion. So I choose to do sort of similar looking animals to show that they're actually on a different spectrum, like fully in the sea or fully on Earth, like this cute little gecko. And obviously ambiversion is supposed to be in the middle. I also read the word like omnivert, but I'm not sure about the differences, but it's basically people that can adapt or can act as an introvert or an extrovert, depending on the circumstances. So first thing to talk about is that shyness and introversion are actually different. So lots of people think it can be related, but it's a bit different. Shyness is really about the social anxiety, fear of being judged, etc. And actually, you can find shy extroverts, which may be very difficult, and also introverts, which actually are also okay with the social situations, obviously. So I think the person that did a lot for extroverts, especially in the workplace, is Susan Cain. So she gave a tech talk, I think in 2012, about the power of introverts, and she really says that basically whether you're introvert or not depends on the sort of environments and stimulation that you like. So basically, she thinks that extroverts prefer more stimulating environments and introverts less. The idea is that if you're in a room full of like social and talking, etc., and lots of people, maybe introverts will need to sort of recharge their batteries on their own after and quicker than an extrovert, where extrovert will sort of probably need a social situation to recharge their own batteries. So that's quite interesting. But yeah, if you're like in the middle, sometimes that can be weird. And yeah, I've got this ambivert problem sometimes, which is extrovert. I think you're a rude extrovert. But you're not, you're just an ambivert. Explains everything. So that said, let's talk now about agile and collaborative ways of working. So I don't know how you all work, but as a note, agile has become sort of a word that everybody uses in lots of different ways. It's become like some sort of a marketing word for a lot of different frameworks and processes, but its origin, agile was a manifesto. So the manifesto and also principles for software development. So like in 2001, there were a few developers that decide to meet and to sort of create this manifesto about how to work together. But yeah, there were lots of other similar frameworks already in place. They just decided to sort of create a manifesto around it. And so there are 4 sentences, like individuals and interactions are more important than processes and tools. Working software is more important than comprehensive documentation. Customer collaboration is more important than contract negotiation. And responding to change is better than following a plan. So that's actually, that's all Agile is in theory, right? And the principle, there are 12 of them. I'm not going to detail all of them here, but yeah, for instance, they talk about how to satisfy the customer by doing like frequent deliveries, work together, conversation. So you can see already the collaboration happening, right? All those sort of together in this picture. There are lots of happy people talking together and interacting and creating amazing work together. So yeah, it comes from the fact, which is collaboration is important, especially in software development. So I think there's this sort of picture about the tree swing that usually is here to illustrate the problems of lack of collaborations and communications within teams, especially, for instance, for waterfall projects, which is if you don't communicate throughout the delivery. So there's the things about how the client might have described the project, how it was understood by, for instance, like product owner, and then how the team ended up implemented it. But what the client wanted was this sort of very simple tree swing. I think my favorite addition to this drawing is the one that adds the open source version, because it actually looks much better than what the client wanted, and it's free, which is not what open source means, but I love this picture. So yeah, basically what happens if the teams just work on their own and don't communicate, or just people decide that are actually supposed to be interconnected but never communicate when necessary, you end up creating silos of communication. So everything that's that you need collaboration will actually end up clashing. So like the different processes, different toolings, different information, and you end up with creating lots of queues and horrible cycle times, etc. So yeah, that's something that obviously working better helps prevent. I think a fun example of working without really talking to each other is this great project called Shrek Retold, which is actually a project when they decided to redo completely the Shrek movie by giving 1 or 2 minutes of scripts to different people. Can't remember how many, 200 people, I think 200 teams participated in it. And they all had to redo this bit of the script in their own way. And so you end up with a movie, which is the story of Shrek, but yeah, it changes style completely every minute, and it's hilarious, but it's also a bit unwatchable after 5 minutes. Yeah, if you've got time, the link is on this slide for after. It's fine. But yeah, obviously, Agile, since it's actually just rules and principles, needs to be applied, and so that's where people started to create obviously frameworks around it and sort of way to apply it in the workplace. For instance, Scrum, Extreme Programming, or Kanban are really well-known ways to apply Agile, but you have to remember that you can be Agile without using any of those. And at the same time, you can use, for instance, Scrum principle without truly being Agile. So that's something to keep in mind. Yeah, I'm just talking here a bit more about extreme programming just because it's not a reality TV show. It's something that actually helped popularize pair programming, since we're actually going to talk, spoiler, about pair programming a lot a little bit later. So yeah, it's supposed to be a very radically collaborative ways of working. Obviously, usually when you work in software, there are actually other things that you need to do, lots of team meetings. So that could be planning, stand-ups, obviously, retrospectives, etc. Obviously, the code is also supposed to belong to the team. If you're doing Kanban, you might also have heard the word swarming, which is if you're being blocked, everybody will sort of help to make sure that everything flows much better. And yeah, pair programming. So with all this sort of 100% time collaboration, does that mean that Agile is actually only for extroverts? So I was reading a few things, and it looks like some people were arguing that indeed those methodologies are more suited for extroverts, that meeting etiquette or all these expectations on collaborating all the time only suits extroverts, and even though maybe there are actually more introverts in a team than not. Actually, it's a cliche to think that there are only introverts in software teams, but yeah, apparently about 1/3 of the population are introverts. Yeah, but yeah, there might be more in a team, and people would still do that. So let's have a look at whether it is true or not. So I've compiled a few quotes from people which are self-proclaimed introverted agilists. So there's this guy who actually wrote a manual which is called the Introverts Agile Survival Guide, which says a lot. So what the first thing he says is that actually, if you go back to the manifestos, it says that individuals and interactions are more important than processes and tools. However, if you search online for things about Agile, you'll find that everything is actually focused on processes and tools. So that's probably one part of the problem. And Juliana Taylor said something else. She said that she's been coached to make sure that, for instance, everybody participates in team meetings, which is obviously great, but everybody thinks that only means talking. And there are lots of cases in meetings where you only also listen to the loudest voice, right? But some introverts might have trouble analyzing the conversation while it's happening. So that's what she says anyway. And Rob Frizzle said something else, which is that people are just not going to cope well with 40 hours of pair programming, stand-up scrums, and iteration demos every week, that introverts need to withdraw. So if you look at it, it looks like it can be a bit daunting for them. But thankfully, this guy said something different, which is a bit more nuanced. He says, Agile itself is not aimed at extroverts, but the way it works in practice can be. So, okay, so what's the situation and what can we do about it? So it's good because those people actually recognize that they need collaboration and that Agile actually works as principle, right? So for instance, Reprisal says that it's hard to admit, but continuous collaboration brings a lot of benefits, and you might even want it, you just don't want it to be so continuous. And this other person said that he's actually a big fan of Agile, and it really works, and he actually loves working with people. Nice, okay. So let's find some ideas and good practices to make sure that Agile actually works for everyone, and that we actually bring pragmatic and Agile, I guess. The first thing that I think I want to share is about collaborative overload, because it's actually a thing that even for everybody, not even for introverts, but too much teamwork, like in just continuously, can actually be exhausting. There's this study that I read, and you can find this graph on the right. They actually looked at the career satisfaction of people in a company, depending on, for instance, on whether they were considered like a good source of information by their colleagues. So basically, were they supposed to be knowledgeable about their domain at work? And the other dimension is about whether they actually being actively asked for question access, etc. Like, are they always interrupted, for instance, by people that ask them a lot of questions? And so they found out that basically the people that are knowledgeable but everybody asks them for their opinion, advice, and questions all the time, they are actually the less happy at work if you look at the size of the bubbles here. So yeah, there are things like that which proves that it's important to limit interruptions, but also if you realize that there are actually, more people that are knowledgeable in your company, and not all of them are the ones being asked, just ask about how that can be shared better and how you can help, promote other people as well, etc. But anyway. The other thing as well is that there's a myth and things about wisdom of crowds. So I've read a few things about how if you ask people to guess the number of beans or sweets in a jar, everybody will be obviously like off or slightly off or a lot off. But if you take the average of the answers, it ends up being like very similar to the actual answer. And it is a thing, but it's also a thing that other people say that like crowds are as stupid as the more stupid person in them, and it comes from situation where you sort of become attuned to average answers but not to the better answers, for instance. And so there are things to do. For instance, wisdom of crowds work if people can do their guesses independently, like individually first. There's like a diversity of the people actually trying to answer. And also things like circuit breakers, like how you end up you prevent situations from escalating in the bad direction. And then, a good way to sort of aggregate those data, and maybe moderation as well. So there are lots of things you can do to sort of tap in the wisdom of crowds. The other thing as well is like there's a myth about brainstorming that it's like incredibly great, but actually the more I read about it, the more careful we need to be, because especially to sort of 100 collaborative brainstorming, like especially physical brainstorming, are actually inefficient. So there's this research paper that says that intermittent breaks in the interaction actually improve the collective intelligence. So basically, they ask people to really sort of stop talking to each other, but also looking at sort of previous ideas, etc., for a bit. And when they came back together to brainstorm or collect ideas, it became really efficient, and they had the best ideas. So something to keep in mind. There are also things that says research that says that brainwriting is more efficient. So it's really about only using writing to brainstorm, or using post-it notes and then pass them around. Electronic brainstorm is supposed to be also very efficient. And so what I would suggest is have like individual brainstorm, maybe followed by regrouping. There's someone as well that wrote an article about how they only organize like silent not maybe retros, but like silent brainstorms, etc. And they managed to actually not speak and still have like generate ideas and great ideas as a team. So yeah, recommend this article if you have time to read it after. But yeah, the idea is to sort of delay the time to speak, and it sort of helps people to formulate better ideas. So what can we say as well about pair programming? So I think it's the same. Pair programming and focused alone time should be used in a healthy cycle. Basically, breaks are really important. And yeah, we're not advised to do it like all the time, basically, even though pair programming is great as a tool. The other thing as well is that if you feel that you're doing much less pair programming than your colleagues, you might want to compensate by doing more code reviews and things like that. Something to keep in mind or to talk about. And there's something else that I sort of ended up looking into when I was exploring this topic are links between efficiency in pair programming and personality types in general. So it's a bit different than introversion and extroversion, but I think that was quite fascinating research by those people. So what they did is that they had read something by other researchers, which said that people with perceived levels that pair together, they think they're working well together. So they try to actually experiment on that and see if it's true and where it comes from. And they experimented with pairs of people that were on different sides of personalities. So pairs of people that had like a completely alike personality, people that had a completely opposite personality, and people that had a diverse personality, which is that they had some things in common and some things not. For that, they used the framework, which is Myers-Briggs, so MBTI. This framework is like basically 16 boxes where to put your personality. And you can see, extroversion and introversion is there. And basically, they sort of analyzed those results, and they ended up finding that people with diverse personalities perform better in a pair programming pair than people with opposite personalities. And themselves, they perform better than people with alike personalities. So that was quite an interesting finding. They think that it's because diverse pairs, basically, they are alike enough that they are able to resolve their differences, but they're also different enough that they can suggest alternative options and actually go further. People which are alike, they are really friendly to each other maybe, but they might not explore so many options because their ways of thinking can be a bit similar. And if they're opposite, maybe there will be more different ideas, but they can have conflicts. So obviously, it's just to use this research as food for thought because the study was probably not that big, but I think it's interesting to keep it in mind. And actually, it follows some advice that I read in another blog post about pair programming, where they really say do not hesitate to pair with different people, just vary the pairs, the groups. Something else we had tried at work at sometimes at Memrise was doing cross skills pairing. So my colleague Bilan had organized a pairing roulette where we ended up like selecting 2 people at random, and from the global product team. And so you could end up like pairing with someone who was not a developer at all, and it was really fascinating to and eye-opening. The other good practice would be, especially if you don't feel super confident or you're afraid of something, is to discuss with each other before pairing, to talk about your styles and preferences and maybe even feedback after the session. And also something to keep in mind is the pair might have different perceived levels, seniority, or just unbalanced power dynamics. And so you might want to try to make it more balanced by just first, if you're working like that, like acknowledging the difference and maybe work on the assumptions that each of the pair might have. Something else is creating maybe a meeting etiquette. So for instance, you can choose when meetings should happen. Sometimes it's obviously not possible to accommodate everyone or everything, but something to keep in mind, and people sometimes have different clocks. Like this one, like I'm not an early bird or a night owl, I am some form of permanently exhausted pigeon. You don't want people to be like that in your team. The other thing that I think was interesting is that managers are on a manager schedule. Which means that usually the managers in the teams are the ones that are really more open to create meetings at any time, or just their options are more open. But the direct contributors are the ones that usually need more focus time. So it's great to have mutual empathy for each other and understand that when setting meetings. Another great advice would be to allow time for attendees to prepare, for instance, set an agenda. So especially for introverts, they might be more comfortable knowing exactly what it's going to be about, and in general, better meeting good practice. But also some introverts might be more comfortable giving their opinion after a meeting when they have time to reflect on it. So if you organize a meeting and people are introverts, you might want to also check with them after, especially if you feel they will be quiet, for instance. yeah, so yeah, you don't want the meeting to end up looking like that, I guess, with just people on their phone or sleeping. So another form of meetings that are a bit more specific are retrospectives of postmortems, etc. Something that actually is helpful is you can try gathering data in advance. So that could be either asynchronously throughout the sprint if you're doing Scrum, or after the last retro if you're not. That could be on Slack, remote retrobots, etc. Or just individually at the beginning of the retro. And again, determine the structure in advance if you can. There are some great tools online that you can use to do that, like a Retromat. It generates like a retro format automatically for you, and then you can tweak it. And there's also Easy Retro, which is great to have online retros, especially during those COVID times. It's really helpful. We were doing some of those with the team. Now, actually, when we were using it, it was called Fun Retro, and now they renamed it Easy Retro. So I don't know if they think that retros are not fun anymore, but at least they're easy. That's something. And yeah, quiet is something that I guess they were more during lockdown situations. But yeah, when people are back to the office, I think to keep in mind interruptions etiquette and make sure that the office is balanced, like for serendipity, but also like quiet spaces, or just in general people that need to recharge or work on their own or get into a quiet area, they should feel that they can talk about it. So yeah, that means the team needs to allow that transparency to happen. The other thing as well is that something a bit more specific, which is not necessarily for developers, but like product owners or Scrum Masters or managers, but something that you can try as well, especially if you're introverted yourself. And if the team agrees, is to try including your own tasks on the board or on the planning to add clarity to both your role, but also reduce ambiguity in general. That can be a really helpful tool. And also you can try out written Slack stand-ups rather than just having a physical stand-up or Zoom stand-ups. Something that works quite well, actually. The other thing would be how you can extend to sort of advice and think about it in different aspects, for instance, hiring and growth. So depending on the company, you can be working on like growth plans. And so that could be good for people that have like a say in growth plans to make sure that they're inclusive and don't foster biases. As an example, if you might want like senior software engineers to share more. So you might want to just say something very specific, like, it would be good if you give a talk, an internal talk at work every 3 months or something. But actually, it's a bit too specific. So it's better to just say what you're looking for, and then let people find their own way. So it's great if they write an article as well, for instance. And in hiring as well, especially if you're doing pair programming interviews, you might want to keep all of that advice in mind, especially understanding that people might be stressed about it, and also the power dynamics that might arise from the situation. That's something that can be looked into if you're using that as a tool. And again, I talk a lot about those personalities, but yeah, I would be careful with using personality tests in hiring. Yeah. However, knowing how to adapt processes and create a diverse team is great. So that's just something to look into. Now, this talk was really supposed to be mostly about introverts, but I think with the lockdown and remote work, I heard a lot of extroverts complain as well about how they felt a bit bad. Now, the other thing is Zoom fatigue, because Zoom fatigue is a thing for a lot of people. So just some tips, again, breaks. Avoid multitasking, and I think some people were also into, you have to need to have the videos on all the time. I think for extroverts it might be great to have your video on all the time, but for people that don't want to, it's great as well to be okay to use like potato filters or even virtual backgrounds. There are lots of really fun ones that you can find for Zoom. My favorite one, I think, was this one, the It's Fine Without the Dog. There's also the Distracted Boyfriend one, which is great for Zoom meetings. And obviously, magnificent screenshots from The Witcher that they actually released in high quality on Twitter. So yeah, just in general, remember to find outlets and a routine, mental health policies in your company if you work in a company. But yeah, there's this article by Erin Jones who wrote like a guide about how to work from home if you're an extrovert. So yeah, I don't want extroverts to feel like they're out of the loop with this talk. But yeah, in general, what I wanted to say as well is that fluidity is a thing. Personality isn't completely fixed, or obviously like 16 boxes, that doesn't really mean anything. There are also research that proves that physical exercise improves brain flexibility, which means that we can all be a bit more obviously able to get out of our way to work in a team, right? And so able to adapt our patterns. The other thing is that actually introversion and extroversions apparently look like they are set in terms of tendency. Like a true introvert won't become a true extrovert because of indeed how it works with like energy, whatever. But obviously it's still mostly flexible, especially a lot of people are in a spectrum which is actually ambiversion. So it's more flexibility than we think usually. And the other thing as well, it's a tool if you want to, you have like a very small team or you're on your own and you want to sort of be able to think differently quickly, is to use tools like the 6 thinking hats. So it's this tool where you can create retros or brainstorm like that. But yeah, you basically everybody gets the same hat at the same time, and you organize a meeting like this. So for instance, you start by getting everything that's going well, and everybody has to think about only something that's positive. And then it's the contrary, everybody has to only think about something to improve. And usually you will get a lot of insights from people which are usually really positive and never want to say anything wrong, but actually there's something that you need to know about the team. And that's sort of when it will happen, when you get everybody to actually only say things like that. Yeah, something great is to get to know each other as a team. So there are lots of tools that you can find to analyze your team and their preferences. So for instance, we looked into whether the team was like chaotic, what were our values as well, etc. And that's actually quite great because then you can understand what are the risks for your team and also what works well. For instance, we found out that the team was quite chaotic as in general, which means that it's great for creativity, but yeah, it might be a bit a problem if people just jump into so many different directions. We also, for instance, got that people hated waterfall, so it was great when you know that people might oppose a change if it's not part of their values. Also some grids for self-assessment about introversion, extroversion, etc. Naomi Carton has an excellent book that you can get online about being an introvert in the workplace. It's not just for software, it's in general. It's quite helpful. The main thing is about asking yourself why you're an ambivert, for instance, in certain situations. Like, are there any contexts that makes you switch from extrovert to introvert, and etc. And that's where obviously that will be helpful to actually understand the patterns rather than just being like 100% or 0%, right? The other thing about MBTI is that you can take the test as well. You can also find like a similar test for free online. The question is that actually, if you look at the literature, it's a bit discredited because it's not that predictive in how people function. Apparently, sometimes people take it twice and it's different results. And also, they criticize the actual choices of categorization. So the questions themselves and those tests can obviously give insights, but yeah, I would be careful. Apparently, psychologists now they prefer the Big Five, which is this test about as well traits like openness, conscientiousness, extraversion. I think I keep on making a typo in my slides. Sorry. Agreeableness and neuroticism. Yeah, and apparently it works a bit better. And it's actually been used as well to analyze the personalities of Winnie the Pooh characters, which I think is great, especially if you want to write. You can use that as a tool to create characters, I guess. And I guess my favorite one, which is not validated by any psychologist at all, is the Dungeon and Dragon alignment, based on how you save your bread. So I'm definitely chaotic neutral because I twist and tuck when I've got bread like that. It's bad. Now, I think the main thing is to end on this note about mutual empathy. So yeah, again, it's just the good thing is to try to understand that people are obviously different and talk to each other about styles and ask questions. It's better than take things for granted and interpret with your own lens. That's the main thing. You obviously adapt when possible, but also open up about your preferences, because sometimes people just can't guess. Just understand that people will process things differently, and if you say that, oh, this method is great because it really works, that's fine, but maybe some people feel that it's difficult for them, and you need to be able to also understand that and discuss to see where the common ground, and make sure that the team works together well, because that's where the real pragmatism is, right? So Naomi Carden has some advice, for instance, for introverts. If you're not sure if extrovert is just thinking out loud or expressing a final thought, just ask. And for extroverts, yeah, don't take only ideas from like the loudest speakers in the room. Try to ask your other colleagues after, etc. In general, yeah, as well, just introverts. Susan Kane, so she's like an introvert, but she says like, introverts, please open more sometimes, and extroverts, please know how to be on your own more as well. So I guess all of that is about the balance. And I think what we found out is that Agile is not only for extroverts, but you need to remember that one of the pillars of Agile is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And so you have to make it work for the team you're in. Breaks in interaction make collaboration better. Don't pair program 100% of the time. Mix pairs, don't pair with always the same people. So you get at some point where you're diverse pairs enough that you get the best insights. Just try to think about how to improve pairing, meeting, interruptions, etiquette, etc. Inclusion in growth and hiring is important, but also personalities and set in stone entirely, and please learn about each other. So here are some references that you might want to find out later if you're interested. And thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation, Céline. I just wanted to remind everybody that a loud virtual applause would be much appreciated. And I also wanted to remind that you can ask questions on all platforms that we're streaming, so both Facebook and YouTube. And you can also ask questions on the Pykonik Slack channel as well. Mm-hmm. So let's wait for some questions. Okay. In the meantime, I have one question. If you would be about to give one takeaway tip for a team lead that organizes many of those meetings, do you think that you could name one?
Yeah, I think the one tip is to listen to the team, obviously. So there is this bias where you tend to do things your own way, even if you think you don't think about it. And so it's great to sort of understand that. So that's why I think one thing that I regret not having done sooner when I joined a new team is actually doing this workshop about getting to know people better. There are lots of things that I discovered by my team or team members after obviously a lot of talking with them, which is great because it's necessary to have those conversations. People won't sometimes open up that easily. But yeah, it's great to sort of share some basics. Yeah, because I can be a bit like, oh, the company is great, let's do that. And sometimes if you don't explain to people in the way they will listen, or if you don't actually understand their arguments, that can be a bit detrimental. So that would be the main things, to try to understand that different ways of working. And then, yes, I don't know if it answers your question. Or...
Yes, that's perfectly fine. In the meantime, we have another question from Tomasz. What do you think about retrospective, as I see that people in general don't like it?
Yes. So Well, okay, so usually I say that retrospective is the only meeting that you can't do without. Like if you have to get rid of all the meetings, do get rid of them, but keep the retrospective. That was my advice for a while. I think now it's more like the idea behind it is great. So I would say like lots of people hate retrospective for different reasons. So the main idea is to understand why, and also understand why you're not getting value from your current retrospective, because it's true. If you're not getting value from your retrospective, you might as well get rid of it. But if you are, then understand how to make it a bit better. Like at Memrise, for instance, I was at some point I was always organizing like different type of retros and stuff like that, and it was fine. But at some point, people get into a bit of a fatigue because they felt that too many ideas were generated, but we ended up not having so much value. And so the team decided to switch to actually the fun retro, which is now easy retro board, and we had like more of a setup format, but it works really well for people to see the ideas written, for instance. So yeah, I would say the first thing to try is try to indeed vary the format of your retro, analyze why you're not getting value or why people hate it, and then that might be changing completely the format or the frequency or yeah.
Okay, thank you. We are still waiting for questions. Okay, so maybe I will have another one in the meantime. Do you think that it's worth to have personality diversity within the team? Like, would the team where there are both introverts and extroverts work better in the end than the one more focused on the one side of the axis?
Yeah, so I would say that in general, diversity in a team works better. So there were a few articles in the slides about specifics like diversity of personalities with pair programming, but there are other things that you can find about that in general in the workplace, because you can generate like more ideas like that. You can also the fact that you have to think about different ways and adapt makes you in general I think the team gets better, and there are lots of things that you might think about on your own or if you are with like-minded people, because then you would tend to also agree with each other more often, but that means that you might not see something that's completely obvious that someone else might have seen, for instance. So yeah, I would recommend to try to strive for diversity in general. But yeah, again, that's why I put this slide about the thinking hats, is that maybe if you're in a team right now and you feel that everybody's the same, or if it's a very small team or like 2 or 3 people, I don't know, then there are tools that you can just try to force your mindset to be a bit different.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We have a comment from Tomasz regards the retrospectives. I have this image that people are forced to say that they were wrong during the sprint.
That they were what, sorry?
That they were wrong during the sprint.
Okay, I don't know. So how the retros are done. So actually, retros they are supposed to be non-judgmental, and they're not supposed to be about right or wrong. They're supposed to be about finding ways to improve the ways of working of the team. So it's actually quite a meta thing. So, but what going wrong in the sprint, but not what you did wrong in the sprint personally. So yeah, if the way your retros are organized are like that, that might be a bit toxic. So that might be something to think about. But yeah, in general, indeed, the formats are usually about what was right during the sprint and what can be improved. But it's not supposed to be about pointing fingers or only saying negative stuff for the sake of saying negative stuff. Everything went right. So yeah, like I think without like a ways to reflect on how the team is working or even the velocity of the team or just how the team is working in general, there's no way to improve. The good things about retro is that then you can try stuff. For instance, you try a new way, you try something new for the team, and you know that you only try it for instance 2 weeks, because then you can always review at the next retro, and it really helps with having more sort of freedom and creativity in how you work. So yeah, I'm really sorry if you feel that those retros are not working.
Okay, thank you for the answer. I don't see any more questions. So just one more final minute. Okay, we have another one. By the way, there is a slight delay between what we see and what is streamed, so keep that in mind, please. So another question from Sunrise Sun: how to convince introverts within a team to express their opinions?
It's a great one. So I think obviously I would suggest to talk with them maybe individually about it. So yeah, I don't know the details of the situation, right? But first get a sense of how they prefer feedback to be given. So for instance, don't maybe point out loud in a public, like in the team or in the public space, like, hey, you just talk more often. But a good way would be to either indeed ask for their opinion after a meeting if you felt that they were really too quiet, and usually they might have time to think about interesting ideas. And you can also talk to them individually if you're a manager or if they're just your colleagues that you care about, to understand why they're like that, and if you feel that they can add more value, how they can just be better. But it's better if it's a conversation with them rather than sort of forcing the situation. But yeah.
Okay, thank you. There is a follow-up question from Tomasz. Are you a fan of retro on end of every sprint?
So I was not working with sprints recently, but with Kanban. But we still had retros like every 2 weeks, which would sort of be a bit like duration of a Scrum sprint. There are different ways to see that. Personally, I like when they are like every 2 weeks or something, because you sort of know, if you know when the next one is going to be and you know the time frame, it really helps to also have a time frame to make the action points from the retro, if there are any. There are also a way, as again, to sort of test stuff, and then when you to come back, and that in 2 weeks you might understand that what you were trying didn't work and you have to change it. If you don't know when the retro is, that might be a bit scary for some people. Now, if it really doesn't work for the team, there are other ways, which is like you gather all the data asynchronously, like everybody gets like their notes about how it's going on a file somewhere else, like indeed like a Slack thread or a retro board or whatever. And when there are enough topics, that's when you have the retro. Or when there's like a big problem, everybody has like a postmortem, which is something that I guess teams do as well. But yeah, there are different ways to deal with retro. I think the idea with sprints is really that you do what you want, right? But obviously the idea is to analyze how the sprint went, and that's why everybody has one at the end of one sprint. Because then if you wait for another sprint, that might be a bit too long to actually set things in place. But I would say just do what works with the team. But it's a conversation to have with the team. Again, that can just be just try to have it in every 2 sprints.
All right, thank you for this answer. I believe we have time for like one more question. So if anyone wants to write a question, just that would be a last minute to do so. Mm-hmm. All right, so I believe that would be it. Tomasz said thanks for your answers. I believe that's it. So once again, thank you very much for your presentation. You got a quite a heavy applause on YouTube. More is always welcome. And we will be back with you in a minute, just with a few final words for the meeting and with the final of the competition for 2 Python licenses or any other JetBrains tools. And if you haven't submitted your photo yet, you have like few final minutes. So grab your phone and take a photo of how you're watching the Pykonik streaming. And as I mentioned, we're back with you in a minute. And once again, thank you, Céline, for a great presentation.